Here it is. The impeachment of Donald Trump. That's right. The impeachment of Donald Trump.
Sit on safety first. Good. Chair now recognizes the ranking member or their counsel for the first round of their 45-minute questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. I want to get a few basic facts on the table of individuals that were involved in the 2016 election, just to see who you know and who you've met with. So I'll start with you, Mr. Holmes. Have you met with or do you know Alexandra Chalupa?
Holmes, could you put your microphone on?
No. Do you know Nellie Orr? You met with Nellie Orr? Bruce Orr?
No.
Glenn Simpson?
No.
Thank you. Same question for you, Dr. Hill. Do you know or have you met with Alexandra Chalupa?
No.
Nellie Orr?
No.
Bruce Orr?
Only in the course of my previous position as the National Intelligence Officer for Russia, where he attended some of the meetings that I presided over.
years ago.
That's a long time ago, correct?
Glenn Simpson?
No.
Dr. Hill, in your testimony, you said that, in your deposition, that Christopher Steele was your counterpart at one time. Is this correct?
That's correct, yes.
You testified that you met with Christopher Steele in 2016. I assume that's still correct?
That's correct, yes.
And the only thing we didn't get on that is, do you know about when that was in 2016 and how many times?
I'm afraid I don't. I actually had met with him, well, you asked me actually in the deposition when the most recent time that I'd met with him in 2016. And he retired from the British Intelligence Services in 2009, which is the same
I'm
time.
asking about 2016.
2016 I don't recall, but I did meet with him sometimes before 2016.
But you don't remember the date?
I don't, I'm afraid, no.
Okay. You stated in your deposition that a colleague had showed you the Steele dossier before it was published. Who was that colleague?
That was one of my colleagues at the Brookings Institution.
And who was that?
That was the Brookings Institution President Strobe Talbot, who had been sent a copy of this.
And he shared it with you?
That was the day before it was published in BuzzFeed.
You mentioned in your deposition also that you thought that it was the exact quote, that the dossier was a rabbit hole. That's still your testimony?
That's correct.
Do you know who paid Christopher Steele to generate the Steele dossiers? There were several of them.
At the time, I did not know. I understand from the media that it was through GPS Fusion. If that's not correct,
You know who was, and there was a law firm involved, but you know who the source of the money was?
I didn't at the time, no, I did not.
But do you know?
Well, now I've read it in reports, and thanks to your colleagues as well, that it was the DNC, as I'm led to believe.
And the Clinton campaign?
I don't know that for sure.
Okay. Mr. Castro.
Good afternoon, welcome back from lunch. Hope you had some sandwiches or something delicious.
Hope you do too.
Dr. Hill, thank you for your service. Also, thank you for your participation in the deposition on October 14th, Columbus Day. We were with you most of the day, so I appreciate that. Mr. Holmes, thank you as well. You're a late entrant into this situation, and things sure did escalate quickly. We spoke with you last Friday night about what we thought was going to be a 30-second vignette about a 2-minute phone call, and it turns out you with your 40-minute opener today, you have a lot of information to share. So we appreciate you being here. Dr. Hill, your last day at the National Security Council was July 19th. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
So you weren't involved with the July 25th call, and you weren't involved with any of the relevant activities related to the pause and the aid?
I was not, that's correct.
And as of July 19th, did you believe that a call was going to be scheduled for the 25th?
I personally did not believe that it was going to be scheduled that date, no.
And what was the thinking at the NSC as of July 19th about such a call?
Well, I've learned from other depositions, to be clear here, that perhaps there was some awareness that there might be a call. Ambassador Sondland, if you may recall, showed an exchange with the person who was taking over from my position, Tim Morrison, in which he indicated that there would be a call coming up. I was not aware of that.
Okay, were you in
favor? So there were differences, let's just say, obviously, in understanding about that call.
And were you in favor of such a call as of the 19th?
Actually, I was not, and I did say something about that in the opening part of the sessions today.
Okay, and how about Ambassador Bolton, to your knowledge?
Well, I know that Ambassador Sondland said in that email that Bolton was in agreement. To my knowledge, Bolton was not in agreement at that particular juncture,
And
to my knowledge.
Do you know what his opposition was?
It was based on the fact that he didn't feel the call had been properly prepared, and as I said earlier, that we wanted to make sure that there was going to be a fulsome bilateral US-Ukraine agenda that was discussed, which is usual with these calls.
And were you surprised that a call ultimately was scheduled?
I was when I learned about it, that's right.
And did you have any communications with anyone back at your old staff about how that came to be?
I did not know.
Yeah.
You did learn about
Sure.
the pause and the security assistance aid.
I learned about that on July 18th, so the day before I left. That's
Okay.
correct.
And there were several meetings about this, I believe you testified to.
I said that I knew there was going to be a meeting in that time frame, and there was one put onto the schedule for the following week, but of course I had left, and so I didn't attend that.
And is it fair to say that stops and starts in aid like this sometimes do happen?
That's correct.
And I believe you testified that there was a freeze put on all kinds of aid and assistance because it was in the process. At that time, there were significant reviews of foreign assistance going on.
That's also correct, yes.
And what else can you tell us about that?
About the foreign assistance
Yeah.
review? As I understood, there'd been a directive for a whole-scale review of our foreign policy assistance and the ties between our foreign policy objectives and the assistance. This had been going on actually for many months. And in the period when I was wrapping up my time there, there'd been more scrutiny than specific assistance to specific sets of countries as a result of that overall review.
And at this time as well, Ambassador Volker and Ambassador Sondland, they had become a little bit more involved with Ukraine policy.
Well, Ambassador Volker was always involved in Ukraine policy, at least since the beginning of his appointment as the special envoy for negotiations towards the war between Ukraine and Russia in Donbass.
What can you tell us about Ambassador Volker?
Ambassador Volker is an extraordinarily accomplished diplomat. I've worked with him in many capacities previously. You know his bio, he's been the ambassador to NATO. He's had a number of positions at the State Department, and actually I know him personally. So, you know, the truth that we're trying to get at it, who knows who and who's met. I know Ambassador Volker really well on a personal level as well.
Okay. And you said he's a man of integrity
That's correct.
and always acted in the best interest of the United States.
Absolutely, yes.
When did you first learn of Ambassador Sondland's involvement?
Well, it came in different ways. Ambassador Sondland, as the ambassador to the EU, had some perfectly logical involvement in the Ukraine portfolio. We work very closely with the European Union on matters related to Ukraine. The Ukrainian dialogue with Russia was in a format known as the Minsk process, which was led by the French and the Germans, and Ambassador Volker was trying to find out ways in which he could work closely with the French and Germans to move along on the resolution of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And obviously the European Union, as the umbrella organisation for Europe in terms of funding and assistance, was heavily active in offering financial assistance to the Ukrainian government as well as humanitarian assistance in the conflict. So it's perfectly logical that Ambassador Sondland would play some kind of role as our ambassador to the European Union.
Did you have any concerns when he presented himself to you as somebody with a major role?
I did at the time in which he presented it to me. This was after Ambassador Yovanovitch had been pushed out of her position. And it was at that juncture that Ambassador Sondland's role seemed to grow larger.
And did you express any concerns to him directly?
I did express concerns to him directly.
What were those concerns?
I asked him quite bluntly in a meeting that we had in June of 2019. So this is after the presidential inauguration, when I'd seen that he had started to step up in much more of a proactive role on Ukraine. You know, what was his role here? And he said that he was in charge of Ukraine. And I said, well, who put you in charge, Ambassador Sondland? And he said, the president.
And did it surprise you when he told you that?
It did surprise me. We'd had no directive. We hadn't been told this. Ambassador Bolton had never indicated in any way that he thought that Ambassador Sondland was playing a leading role in Ukraine.
I believe you used the term a large remit, that he characterized he had been given a large remit from the president.
I can't remember when I said remit, but it was portfolio. He was constantly, you know, these are all synonyms. He was talking to us about the fact that he'd been given a very broad portfolio by the president. He said his job was to go out and make deals in Europe. And as you know yourself, I listened to his testimony yesterday very carefully as well. He said that anything that had to do with the EU itself and the European Union member states was within his portfolio.
Right. We asked Ambassador Sondland about that at his deposition, and he conceded that he may have been spinning a little bit when he said that the president specifically gave him that role, and he indicated that his authority was coming at least a little bit more from the Secretary of State. At any point in time, was that related to you?
At different points, he mentioned talking directly to the Chief of Staff Mulvaney, and he also talked about Secretary Pompeo. But he was very
Here it
in fact,
is.
there were other people in the room
The
in the
impeachment
meeting
of Donald Trump.
asserted this to me.
That's
that it was
right.
the president who
The
had put him in charge
impeachment
this.
of Donald Trump.
Were you encouraged as of your last day in the office that U.S. policy towards the Ukraine was headed in the right direction?
I was not.
And why was that?
Well, I was concerned about two things in particular. One was, again, the removal of our ambassador. And again, I will say for the record that the president has a perfect right to remove any ambassador at any time for any reason. But I was very concerned about the circumstances in which her reputation had been maligned repeatedly on television and in all kinds of exchanges. I felt that that was completely unnecessary. If the president wanted to remove an ambassador, which he did quite frequently, there was a number of ambassadors removed who were not political but career officials. That was done, but without these kinds of interventions. I wondered what that message was being sent. So there was that. And then on the second front, it was very clear at this point that there was, let's just say, a different channel in operation in relations to Ukraine, one that was domestic and political in nature, and that was very different from the channel or the loop, however you like it, that I and my colleagues were in, where we were focused on bilateral relations and US foreign policy toward Ukraine. And these two things had diverged at this point.
In the run-up to Ambassador Yovanovitch's separation from post, did you have any communications with officials at the State Department about your concerns?
I did.
And who did you relate those concerns to?
I related those concerns directly to my counterpart, who was Acting Assistant Secretary Phil Rieker, who I know you've spoken to. I also spoke to David Hale in the context of larger meetings about many other issues. I mean, again, I covered a broad portfolio myself, and we often would talk about individual items. And I had private discussions with Deputy Secretary Sullivan, and he, of course, has appeared before committees here in the course of his nomination to be ambassador to Russia, and has spoken about that himself.
Okay, and you advocated to all those officials about your concerns about the information being spread about Ambassador Yovanovitch?
I did, that's correct.
The Trump administration changed courses from its predecessor and provided lethal defensive assistance to the Ukraine. Were you in favor of arming the Ukrainians with the javelins?
I was not initially in 2015 before I joined the government, and I'm sure that many people on the committee have seen that I wrote an opinion piece with a colleague at the Brookings Institution in that juncture, because I was very worried at that particular point in time that the Ukrainian military was not in a fit state to really take on board sophisticated weapons, be they defensive or offensive weapons. And I worried that there was not a long-term sustainable plan given the overwhelming force that the Russians could apply against the Ukrainians. However, when I came into government in 2017 and started to interact with all of my colleagues in the Pentagon, and you had Laura Cooper here yesterday, I realised, in fact, that there'd been an awful lot of work done on this, and that there was a clear and consistent plan for the sustainability long-term of the Ukrainian military. So I changed my mind.
Okay, and you're in fact one of the, I believe, the only witness that we've spoken to that has been able to articulate the opposition to providing the javelins. And as we understand it, during the Obama administration, the interagency consensus was, in fact, to provide the javelins, but they were not provided. Were you aware of the decision back then?
I was, and I think it was very much made on a political basis about concerns that this would provoke the Russians, depending on how this was presented. And we were very mindful of that also when there were the discussions internally about the lethal defensive weapons inside of the administration.
And Mr. Holmes, you're on the ground in Kyiv, and the javelins have now been authorized, provided. What's the view from the field, the U.S. Embassy, as to the effectiveness of the javelins?
They're an important strategic deterrent. They're not actively employed in combat operations right now, but the mere idea that were the Russians to advance substantially using certain kinds of armor, that the Ukrainians would have this capability, deters them from doing so. It also thereby sends a very important symbolic message to the Ukrainian military that they have access to this high-end technology and that we trust them to do it. I'd only add also that they've offered to buy some using their own funds. The initial tranche was provided through basically a program to do that, but they've now offered to spend their own money to buy more. So I think they think they're important.
And Ambassador Taylor has testified, Mr. Kent has testified that this is
Testing.
the consensus of the interagency providing the javelins. Is it the in your experience of working with Ambassador Taylor, was he also very much an advocate for this?
Yes. Mr. Holmes, I want to go back to name some Americans. Now I want to talk a little bit about Ukrainian government officials. Are you familiar with Sergei Leshchenko? Yes. Have you met with him? I have. He was a journalist, then he was in the parliament. Is he currently in the parliament? Journalist again. Journalist again. Are you aware that when he was in the parliament that he had provided information to a Fusion GPS operative named Nellie Orr? I'm not aware of Nellie Orr. I'm not aware of who he provided information to. I'm aware that as a journalist, he's provided information. Well, he was in the parliament at the time. This is in the 2016 campaign. He provided widely known as the Black Ledger. Have you ever heard of the Black Ledger? I have. And the Black Ledger, is that seen as credible information? Yes. The Black Ledger is credible? Yes. Bob Mueller did not find it credible. Do you dispute what Bob Mueller's findings were? They didn't use it in the prosecution or in the report? I'm not aware that Bob Mueller did not find it credible. I think it was evidence in other criminal proceedings. Its credibility was not questioned in those proceedings, but I'm not an expert on that. So the motivation for Leshchenko, as was reported to, was to go after a Trump campaign official and undermine Trump's candidacy. Are you aware of that? If you mean by the release of the Black Ledger, I think Leshchenko's motivation was the same motivation he's always expressed, which is to expose corruption in Ukraine. Right, but he's admitted motivation was to partly at least undermine the Trump candidacy that he did not support. He has not said that to me.
That's better.
If he said that to you, I'll take your word for it. And you're aware that you heard Dr. Hill's testimony, but the Steele dossier that contained that initial information that was fed in the FBI, were you aware that the Democrats had paid for that information? So, sir, I never had any involvement directly with it. I'm not accusing you of involvement. I'm just asking if you, not even if you knew at the time, but you now know today that the Democrats had paid for that information. So I do want to be clear that all that happened before I arrived in Ukraine, so I don't have any firsthand. Not accusing any involvement of you with the Steele dossier. Understood, but I do want to be clear about that. And then in addition, I have read about those issues, but I'm not an expert on them. But you're not disputing that the Democrats and the Clinton campaign were the source of funds that funded the Steele dossier? I wouldn't be in a position to dispute that, sir. Do you think it's appropriate for political parties to run operatives in foreign countries to dig up dirt on their opponents? No. Dr. Hill, do you think it's appropriate for political parties to pay operatives to dig up dirt on their opponents?
I do not.
Mr. Castor.
Turn to the President Zelensky's inauguration. Ambassador Volker testified that he was very pleased with the size of the delegation, although the Vice President was unable to make the trip. Secretary Perry, Ambassador Volker, Ambassador Sondland. And I understand, Dr. Hill, you were involved with some of the logistics and putting the delegation together. What can you tell us about the Vice President's role in attending or not attending?
Well, I know that you've had the testimony of Jennifer Williams from the Vice President's office, and I defer to her as being much closer to the decision-making about the Vice President's attendance. I will say that I and many others hoped that the Vice President would be able to attend. And what I know from my perspective, because I was not involved intimately in discussions with the Vice President or his immediate staff, was that there were some questions about the schedule. As you all know, the President and Vice President can not be out of the country at the same time. And there were some questions about presidential travel in the same time frame. There was quite a bit of back and forth as to whether it would be really feasible for the Vice President in that time frame to go. So that was what I was aware of. I wasn't aware to the extent of the discussions that obviously Ms. Williams was involved in.
Right, the President was traveling in Japan, and then he was headed to Europe for the D-Day anniversary. The Vice President's office, according to Ms. Williams, provided 4 days, the end of May, the 29th, 30th, 31st, June 1st. And as it turned out, the Ukrainians decided, I believe it was on May 16th, to schedule the inauguration for 4 days later. And by this point in time, the Vice President had been rerouted for a trip to Canada about the USMCA. And I just want to ask you whether you don't have any evidence that the Vice President was encouraged not to attend for any other reason, do you?
I personally do not, but again, I defer to Ms. Williams.
And Ms. Williams' testimony was that she heard from the Chief of Staff's assistant that the Vice President was not able to go. The leap, that the reason for that was related to any of these investigations hasn't been fully established. I want to just note from the materials you provided for your deposition, there was a discussion whether President Orban may have influenced President Trump's decision on that May 13th day. And do you remember when the meeting was with President Orban?
I do.
When was that?
That was in May, that's correct.
So do you remember what time of day it was on the 13th?
To be honest, usually these meetings are around lunchtime, sometime in that time frame, in the kind of early to mid part of the day.
Right.
But I can't speak for sure, and I just want to be very clear that I cannot speak about head of state engagements.
Okay. Jennifer Williams testified that she learned about 11 or 11:15, and the meeting with President Orban was not scheduled until later in the afternoon. According to your schedule, it was right around 1:45. Is that consistent with your recollection?
Well, about the lunchtime time frame, yeah. Depending on when one has lunch, I guess.
But overall, given the 4 days' notice, given Secretary Perry's involvement, do you think